All right, since it is 4:10 Berkeley time, or 4 o'clock Berkeley time, I think we can get going. All right, so good afternoon, distinguished guests, fellow faculty, current and former Golden Bears, and all manner of friends. Welcome to Berkeley's annual Fleet Admiral Chester W. Nimitz Memorial Lectureship in National Security Affairs, which since 1985 has hosted a distinguished scholar, military professional, or government official for a series of lectures on national security subjects. I'm Captain Travis Petzold. I'm the professor of naval science and the commanding officer of Berkeley's Naval Reserve Officer Training Corps unit, which is composed of about 50 young men and women who have volunteered to serve their country as officers in the United States Navy or Marine Corps after they earn their undergraduate degrees. This unit was one of the original 6 such units established across the nation in 1926. Berkeley also hosts Army and Air Force Reserve Officer Training Corps units, all under the Military Affairs program in the College of Letters and Science. It's an absolute privilege to work with the talented students in Berkeley's ROTC programs, but I'm also very fortunate to work with the esteemed and supportive faculty here at Berkeley, such as Professor Daniel Sargent and his fellow members of the Military Officers Education Committee. I'm particularly lucky to have as my direct boss, Dean of Undergraduate Studies, Professor Bob Jacobson, an avid supporter of both this lecture series and of educating tomorrow's military officers so that they serve our nation with honor, courage, and commitment. Please welcome Dean Jacobson, who will introduce today's speaker. Not mine.
Welcome to this year's lecture in honor of Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz. Many of us know Admiral Nimitz from the titanic struggles of World War II in the Pacific. His leadership and will to fight helped shorten that war significantly. Because this is California, his accomplishments in the Pacific were recognized by naming a highway after him. But actually, his career stands for much more. There's an important context to his eventual success. Before that war broke out, in the earlier parts of Admiral Nimitz's career, or to be Admiral Nimitz's career, he chose to work on some of the most complex and important issues of the time. He worked on technology that was not certain to be a success, diesel propulsion. He worked on the question of personnel, which was a very hard problem to be resolved in a peacetime Navy. And as the midshipmen know, he created the ROTC program, including this unit, which was one of the first 6. All these efforts were forerunners to his success, the country's success during the Second World War. Although his leadership during the war was important, his role in preparation for any future, even a future that was completely unexpected and people didn't want to contemplate, was also of great importance. That kind of commitment to engaging on important questions, preparing for and advancing into the future, I want to think is a Berkeley characteristic. Our job, your job, is to consider the future and do what you can to be ready for it. In that spirit, I am very pleased to announce and welcome tonight's Nimitz speaker, Air Force General Ellen Pawlikowski. How'd I do? Although not a Berkeley ROTC graduate, as her undergrad was at the New Jersey Institute of Technology, she came to Berkeley for a PhD in chemical engineering right after that, and she got it in 3 years. So if there are any graduate students in the audience, you can do that too. She then started a distinguished career in the Air Force in which she worked on key problems facing the Air Force and the country: atomic energy, counterproliferation, chemical and biological defense, airborne lasers, military satellite communications, and reconnaissance. That's pretty cool. That's a great set of problems that need to be addressed by thoughtful people. And echoing Admiral Nimitz's determination to work on preparation for wars that nobody wants to come, all of these questions have to be addressed. Like Nimitz, she even took on the key question of personnel, serving as I love this title. I wish someday I would have this title. The Chief of the Revolutionizing Training Division of the Aeronautical Systems Center at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I mean, I work on just trying to keep Berkeley sane. The idea of revolutionizing training is very daunting. Most recently, after achieving the rank of 4-star general and led the Air Force Materiel Command. Again, remember that preparation is one of the most important things you can do. Since her retirement, she's become a Judge Widney Professor at USC Engineering, which I claim is a big deal. That's a good engineering school. She teaches a systems architecting and engineering course which is probably an incredible experience for her students. She's a member of the National Academy of Engineering, which is also a big deal, and she's here to address us all with her thoughts. Thank you for coming, General Pawlikowski.
All right, well, first of all, I want to thank the committee and the Navy ROTC unit here for inviting me to come and speak. I cannot tell you what a tremendous honor this is. You know, we all go through our life not sure where our lives are going to take us, but to think that I could come back to my alma mater and get a chance to share with you my thoughts. In fact, as I was looking at the agenda, I realized so many memories flooded back. My first year, I lived in International House. I had a little room in the back, and as a graduate student, you heard I finished in 3 years. Well, I worked long hours, and I didn't go to football games, but I had the opportunity to hear every minute of it through the back. And I walked, and then I lived on Ellsworth Avenue the next year, so I got a chance to walk through the campus. In fact, I was reflecting my first year here, since it was the College of Chemistry, I don't think I ever got south of Sproul Plaza or north of Sproul Plaza the whole year I was here. And I have to tell you, when I made the decision to go to graduate school after commissioning and to take a delay from going on active duty. And that was certainly something I had never thought about doing. I remember one of my chemical engineering professors said to me, you're really good at this, and we think you ought to go to graduate school, and you can get somebody to pay for it because you got good enough grades. And I'm thinking, I don't want to go to school anymore. I'm ready to go out and serve, right? But I went ahead because I had a passion. All right, any engineering students out here? I had a passion for thermodynamics. Right, Georgiana? And the man in the whole world who was not just the father, but the grandfather of something called molecular thermodynamics lived right here at Berkeley, and that was John Prausnitz. And so I made up my mind, okay, I'm going to go to graduate school. And now I'm in ROTC in 1978, and I decide I'm going to go to Berkeley. Now, some people in this room understand what that meant. That was just at the end of the Vietnam War. War was over, but it wasn't completely over in the hearts and minds. And Berkeley was known as one of the nests of protests and disagreements. So I had my ROTC classmates saying, what are you doing? Are you nuts? Why are you going? What are you going to do going out there? But I just had such a passion to study thermodynamics with John Prausnitz that I didn't care. And I have to tell you, I believe I am here today because of that decision. Not because they invited me because I was an alum, but because of what I was able to accomplish. Because the military is a very structured organization. You guys are probably figuring that out, right? And it's that way on purpose. But this country does not have a standing army. We are all citizen soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen. And when you come to a place like Berkeley, the thing that I discovered about Berkeley was the freedom that you have at Berkeley to think and to innovate. And so what I got from my years at Berkeley was an understanding of the tremendous power and ability to accomplish things that can come from opening up that creativity in your own mind and being willing to take the courage to take on things that others may think are impossible. And because of that experience that I had here, I had an amazing career of taking technologies and putting them to good use for our national security. And I like to say it that way. I believe that my job as an Air Force officer, as a technologist, as an acquisition officer, was to ensure that all of those young men and women, many of them are sitting here now, that voluntarily put themselves in harm's way to protect our freedom, do so knowing that the things we give them to fight and defend themselves is going to work, are going to work, and they're going to work every time. And so I can sit back now and look at 40 years and be proud of the fact that I was able to take that innovative spirit, that creativity, that sometimes got me into trouble, right, Professor Smith? But I was able to take that and turn it into something that was good, not just for this country, but I believe for the world. The thing I learned about that time, and as I reflected on my career, is just how much technology has impacted the way we fight wars and the way we protect our freedom. So I decided that, given the opportunity to come back to Berkeley, I would go back to my roots and talk about how much technology has affected warfare and national security in the past. Take a look at what are those technologies that are going on today, and it's an exciting time in national security for a technologist. It's just an amazing time. How has that changed the way those young men and women protect us? How we conduct military operations, what our national security looks like. And then if you'll allow me, I'd like to kind of project a little bit, give you my opinion about what I think warfare will look like in the future. I'll take a look at about 20 years, which I think I can do a pretty good job of projecting. Since I spent 40 years in the Air Force, I can think back about, how much things have changed. I'll look at 50 years, and then I'll look at 100 years, and frankly, at 100 years, my opinion's as good as yours. But I've got this microphone, so you get to listen to mine. So let's start out with the man that this speech, or this speaking series is all about, and that's Admiral Nimitz. And I have to admit, I didn't know much about Admiral Nimitz except for the fact that he was the head guy in charge in the Pacific. So I went and did a little bit of homework after I accepted this speaking engagement. Pretty handsome guy, huh? He was an academy grad, not an ROTC grad, which is a shame because he didn't get that opportunity to have that ROTC experience. That's what I tell all my academy friends. But much of what he did when he wasn't fighting was, as the dean pointed out, was getting ready for the next war, and he was a technologist as much as he was a fighter. In fact, during the interwar years, between World War I and World War II, he was a big part in testing and implementing underway refueling, which was critical in World War II, particularly in the Pacific. Without underway refueling, ships had to go back to a port in order to be able to steam. So this was a critical aspect of our World War II capability. And then his brilliance during World War II left without, I know all my Navy compatriots know the story of Pearl Harbor and how it changed much about how the Navy conducted the war because we lost so many ships. But Admiral Nimitz had not just the trust of technology, but the courage to take technology places that others wouldn't. And here's a guy who pretty much was known for surface warfare and submarines that crafted the island hopping campaign that was used to march our way to Japan during World War II. He relied on aircraft carriers. He relied on aircraft. It was so, I think back about some of the generals that I've met in the Air Force who refused to get out of what they did back in 1982, and this was a man who had trained for years on surface warfare that conducted an air campaign. Truly a man that deserves a speech that talks about technology and its impact on warfare. So without that, let's take a look at what he had to work with that really, World War II changed warfare in more ways, I believe, than any other experience in modern time, counting the Civil War. And there were a number of things that allowed us to do this. Think back now, everybody always tries to win the last war. World War I, trench warfare, chemical weapons, masses of people killed firing at each other over a no man's land. So a lot of what was focused on in between World War I and World War II was to avoid being in that. And a lot of that had to be ability for speed and to be able to reach long distances. And that was one of the major focuses of aircraft and aircraft engines. So aircraft during World War I were pretty much just mano-a-mano battles, some reconnaissance. And then in World War II, they became a way to overcome that tyranny of distance and to be able to get somewhere and effectively provide bombs on target with speed. I think I'm going the wrong way. Sorry about that. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. I gotta get back to my chart. Okay. So, but when you got there, in the old time, you could just lob them over and it was not very good, not very precise. So we had this thing called the Norden bomb sight, which allowed bombardiers to precisely drop bombs. And so instead of World War II was personified not by masses of people on two ends of living in trenches and trying to kill each other with machine guns, but armadas of aircraft, bombers protected by fighter aircraft, hundreds and dozens and dozens of them, effectively eliminating any issue with now don't get me wrong, boots on the ground is still important, but the World War II was defined and was won because of the effectiveness of air power, both in helping the naval operations in the Pacific and in Europe when it comes to the strategic bombing campaign. And then there were the submarines and torpedoes. That was a way to surprise. Torpedoes, by the way, was something else that Admiral Nimitz worked on. That was a whole new, so think about this. We just recently established a Space Force, right? So now we have a space domain that we think about today. It's actually been a little bit longer. World War II defined two new domains, undersea and in the air. Completely changing the way you think about naval operations, because now you've got to worry, you've got this as an effective tool and you've got to worry about it, and in the air. And then, just radar. Radar was used in so many ways, but another way to be able to bring lethality precisely was radar-aimed proximity fuses. So this changed the way we conducted the war. And then I like this one. We like to talk about cyber, but really the whole activity started with the codes and intercepting codes, which if you extrapolate back is that control of the spectrum, right? And intercepting the spectrum. And by the way, I want to point out that that is a woman. Because during World War II, the majority of the cryptologists that were in the Navy cryptology in Virginia were women. graduates of college that had mathematics degrees, and they worked long hours in very, very poor conditions. So that's another thing that's so great about this country, is our embracing of the value of diversity and how this truly was an all of country activity. So these were the things that Admiral Nimitz had and that we had that really changed the way wars were fought. And of course, the ultimate game changer was how the United States ended the war, which was the application of nuclear power or nuclear weapons. I want to just, we'll get back to this a little later in it, but note that in World War I, chemical weapons were used pretty frequently. You notice they weren't used in World War II. If at all, if any, it was used only a little bit. But the nuclear weapon was a key part of ending the war. So I know there's a few people that have hair with colors kind of like mine and gray, so we all remember that there really wasn't an interwar year because we went right into the Cold War. And I bring that up because that new technology, that nuclear weapon, that nuclear capability really defined the Cold War. And the Cold War, once again, was a complete change to the way the United States conducted national security. We are a nation, as I pointed out, that never likes to have a standing army. And we were faced with a very large force in Europe. And we did not want to take that on. So we had what my good friend, former Deputy Secretary Bob Work, calls the first offset. Our first offset to masses of military was this nuclear weapon. And for those of us who lived during that time, this was all about, our national security was all about this threat of a nuclear war with the Soviet Union. We had the way we defended it was something called mutual assured destruction, which says, you destroy me, I'll destroy you. That's not exactly the most appealing strategy, but that's what it was. But it also did more than just influence the military. Anybody recognize this picture here? How many in this room hid under their desk in practicing for a nuclear attack? I kid you not. I know the rest of you, those of you who weren't around are looking at us like we were nuts. But Homeland Security, we used to go in your school and you would practice if there was a nuclear attack. We would go under our desk or go into the basement of the school and huddle in the hallways. And people actually had these underground facilities for if we had a nuclear attack. Warriors were no longer just flying in airplanes, they were sitting in silos below, by the way, this silo still looks like this, underneath the ground so that they would be protected and we could launch that nuclear weapon if we were attacked, because he would survive at least long enough to launch the weapon, so we actually had a viable mass mutual assured destruction. But growing up, this is what we thought about, right? This is what we thought about. This was what national security was, protecting our country, protecting our homeland from this threat. And we waited with bated breath every time the President of the United States would get together with the President of the Soviet Union, or was he a president? Was that the title he used? I don't even remember anymore. But to talk, and it was a game. It was a game of Russian roulette at times. We went through the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was an example of okay, you've stepped too far because the Soviets had put nuclear weapons, or were going to put nuclear weapons on Cuba. This was the Cold War. Very different from World War II and the nature of how warfare was thought and the nature of where our priorities were. And it was the Cold War. And it was, none of this would have happened without the technology development of nuclear weapons. So think about this. We used nuclear weapons in anger twice. and no one has ever used them again. So I think this is a pretty good national security strategy. Now the question is it going to be good enough in the future? We'll talk about that. So now we go to 1990. And you know, these nuclear weapons are great for keeping a power that's got nuclear weapons. But there's things else going on in the world in which we have to be able to protect our interests. And in 1990, the nation of Iraq invaded Kuwait. And this was considered a threat to our national interest, and so we went to war again. But you know what? It wasn't dozens and dozens of bombers accompanied by fighter aircraft that we used. It was something called stealth, this ugly looking airplane. Any fighter pilot would look at this thing and say, what an ugly looking airplane. But this is a thing of beauty, because this airplane can't be seen by radar because of its shape. So now, instead of dozens of airplanes to go in and to provide lethal effects, it's one airplane. And now what's important is how you track, how you go through the path of that airplane, not the large number of aircraft. And then this is the sight from the first night. Anybody remember that? I know that you're all still too young for it, but those are all Tomahawk missiles over the city of Baghdad. Now, the remarkable thing about that is, you remember that, you know, those naval ships bombardment, right? Well, now this is what naval ships were used for, to go hundreds of miles and to have an impact, again, taking away the protection of distance and keeping Americans out of harm's way while still being lethal. We all watch this too, because the precision that we could use in doing this allowed international news people to stay in the city of Baghdad and not be threatened. Think about how different that was than the bombings of Dresden and Berlin. That was just, roughly 50 years before that. So warfare, once again, had changed. It had changed in addition to precision weapons. GPS, Global Positioning System. This was the first war. It was called the first space war because it was the first time that military operations really used space systems. GPS, which now we all take for granted, but in 1990, this was the first time we had ever used GPS to precision weapons, which enabled us, by the way, to take out an adversary right next to a hospital and not harm the hospital. So as we evolved, we got our ability to keep ourselves out of harm's way by having the speed and the ability to go long distances. And then this little thing here is a radar. Airborne command and control with a radar. Those airplanes flew, that's a Joint Stars. And you're familiar with the Joint Stars, aren't you, Professor Smith? It flew as an experimental airplane at that time, by the way. And it was able to accurately relay to ground troops where tanks and other moving targets were, and to be able to destroy them. Once again, taking away the value of distance and improving our speed and our accuracy. So we keep evolving through this, and the impact of space was not just GPS, but communication, which we take for granted today, but there were no cell phones in 1990. Might have been one or two, but they certainly weren't, the Army certainly wasn't using them. And we had satellites for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance that were actually designed to do the nuclear security mission that we actually used in operations to once again give us eyes and ears throughout the world. So we see this trend now continuing of being able to be effective at a long distance keeping ourselves out of harm's way, being precise and lethal to be able to target exactly what we wanted and minimizing collateral effects, and having the ability to get information and to acquire information from around the world. Once again, this was a whole different campaign and a battle than what we saw in Vietnam or in World War II, because of the advancements in technology that allowed us to get that speed, to be able to penetrate and not be seen, to be able to get information around the world by use of space. All technology developments. Now let's look at today. Today is a fascinating time in looking at the nature of warfare, because technology, once again, I believe, is putting us on the cusp of what is going to, is already a pretty dramatic change and is going to be even more. Social media. It's both a curse and a huge benefit. Social media has eliminated the ability to hide, because so many people can see things and observe things. I see it myself. You know, I was the commander of Air Force Materiel Command. The dean told you that, and I lived in Dayton, Ohio, and I had a base at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida, and there was another base out here at Edwards Air Force Base, and there was a fire at Eglin Air Force Base. And now I'm the commander. The person who reports to me is the guy at Edwards, and then the commander at Eglin reports to the guy at Edwards. And so the usual fashion for me to be notified that there's been a fire at Eglin Air Force Base is for the Eglin commander to call the Edwards commander, who then will call me. Well, my secretary came walking into my office and she said, you know, I just got a Facebook message from so-and-so down at Eglin that there's been a big fire at one of the test facilities. 2 minutes later, I got the call from the commander at Edwards. So if that happens to me, think about, and we saw this happen in Georgia, not the state of Georgia, but the country of Georgia. We saw the Russians cyber attack on Georgia government resources that crippled their effectiveness at being able to counter Russian movement. We saw the Russian involvement and other involvement in our election. So now when we think about homeland security, when we think about our national security, those oceans aren't going to do us much good, are they? We now have to think about that spectrum warfare, as I like to call it, in a whole different light than we did before. This is another example. Space is now becoming a commercial market. This is an image taken from a commercial satellite of a North Korean missile launch. Now, we have all these special protocols in this country where we're trying to watch all these sites so that we know when a missile that might be coming to attack us is. And we do all sorts of things in this country where we don't want other people to know what we're doing. Not anymore. Not anymore. You can't hide anymore. So any training you do, anything you do, it's either going to be there on the internet or it's going to be a commercial space asset that's going to be able to find it. And then there's this little thing called a drone, or a remotely piloted aircraft, as we prefer in the Air Force, or an unmanned aerial vehicle, which has got the Air Force really upset, these small little ones, because for over a century now, we have taken pride in the fact that no U.S. soldier has ever been killed or fired upon from the air because we protect the skies. These things fly low. Right now, in Afghanistan and in Iraq, they are a real issue. With, dropping, they are hard to kill, And when we talk about some of the new technologies we have, there's even more issues when we talk about autonomy and these operating. So these are all things that have to change the way we think about what are, and by the way, they're easily can fly around in this country, and the FAA still hasn't sorted out quite how they're going to deal with it. And this, by the way, is a 3D printed part. I put that up there because I think 3D printing is kind of cool, or is what we call it additive manufacturing. But what it is doing, it's going to change the way we do logistics. It's going to change the fact that we're not going to need to have stockpiled of parts because we'll just build it. And it's going to change the speed at which we can change designs, because all you do is change the software. You don't have to retool your hardware. So it's going to change warfare because of what it's going to enable us to do things, because Clausewitz said it, Eisenhower said it, logistics wins wars. And if it doesn't win it, it will lose it for you, for sure. So when we look at things like additive manufacturing, artificial intelligence, and all of the things that we can do to improve our ability to, and keeping less people in harm's way means less fuel I have to get there. I mean, all of these things are multipliers that change the way we do warfare. Let's just look at this simple example and how much it has changed the way our national security, we think about national security and we think about warfare. This was the assassination, if that's a word that I can use, maybe not, of General Soleimani. How did this play out? Well, we had a remotely piloted vehicle. So Americans were there, but not in harm's way. All right? They used a precision weapon, 2, I think, is what they surmise, minimal collateral damage. We destroyed 2 cars and nothing else in the area. The intelligence came from the internet and from the commercialization of space, in the fact that RPA, the command and control of that RPA is over commercial SATCOM. And the data that comes from reconnaissance is transferred over commercial SATCOM. But this is the thing that I want you to think the most about. Back 50 years ago, this would have been an assassination. The only way we would have been able to have done this is to have put Americans in there, had them at risk, and this would have been considered an act of war, to have gone in to a neutral country and assassinated it. But think about the debate we've had. No, it wasn't. This was, we believed he was an immediate threat, and we've got all of the lawyers and everybody debating about what immediate means, right? With respect to whether this was a legal action on the part of our president or not. But we could never have done this without the technologies that I've described. So we are in a position now, so it's kind of which came first, the chicken or the egg. Was it the policy that enabled us to use the technology in that way? Or has the policy changed because the technology enabled it to happen? And I guarantee you in the next few years we'll have more and more debates like the one you saw going on with respect to the Soleimani raid, because technology is challenging the way we think about national security. There's a few new things too. This whole issue of cyber is changing the way we think about homeland security. And by the way, it's not, this talks about the fact that there were 105 nation states that have used cyber. Well, we did too. Then when there were cruise missiles launched against us by the Iranians, and you may remember in the press that the president decided he wasn't going to go forward with the attack because too many would die. So what do? We launched cyber operations against those missiles. So think about this. Now, we don't even have to be anywhere near, and we can affect a change in the system. Now, I know this already because I have a home security system, and I travel a lot, and I have a cleaning service that comes once a week. So when they show up, my doorbell rings, and my app tells me my doorbell's ringing, and I'm here. I live in Georgia, by the way, and I just get on my app and I push the button and I open the door for them. And if I can do that, what can I do with a military robust system that can allow me to trigger things remotely, right? And then, so thinking back, Cold War, we had bomb shelters. I think we're going to need to be seriously thinking about some cyber hardening, because one of the things that's an issue is infrastructure, power, water, and gas. If I can, all those systems are computer controlled. So cybersecurity is now the new, in my mind, cyber hardening, security against cyber is the new bomb shelter for the 21st century as a nation when it comes to our homeland security. Here are some emerging technologies that we're still learning to understand how they could change warfare. One is, a lot of this is based on artificial intelligence, but we look at it differently depending on how we're applying it. Swarming autonomous drones. For all of us Star Wars fans, we remember all the robots, but this is essentially the killer robots on drones. And this one is one that we're going to have to think about, because there's ethical issues associated with this. But I ask you to think about, when we send cruise missiles that have radar sensing, radar fusing on them, how much different is that than using drones that use a little more sophisticated analysis of the sensors? So it's going to happen. Biological-based sensors. One of the big challenges for the Army in particular is all these batteries they got to carry around, because everything requires battery power. Well, biology offers us a real opportunity to be able to improve our sensing around the world, and I think it's going to do it. Hypersonic weapons. That tyranny of distance is going to be completely wiped out if we can get these weapons. You will not be able to stop it. And then what I call ubiquitous information. 5G, Internet of Things. We grew up where, I had a party line on my phone when I was a kid. I didn't have my own cell phone. You didn't have information available. My first cell phone, all it did was make phone calls, right? It didn't have text messages or anything else. So this generation takes it for granted. And warfare is going to see the advantage of this and the disadvantage of this, because everything's going to be connected and nothing's going to be independent. And we've got to figure out, first of all, how do we defend ourselves against this? And then secondly, how do we use it to our advantage? So these are some of the technologies that I find intriguing. This is the list that the Department of Defense considers its top technology priorities. It's an interesting list when you look at it. As a purist, I say it's kind of apples and oranges on there. Some of those are technology areas, right? Some of them are just areas of interest. For example, we've been doing command control and communications since the Revolutionary War. But I think what the department means is now, what does it mean when we use artificial intelligence and we have 5G and we have the Internet of Things? Autonomy is another representation of artificial intelligence. But I put this chart up here mainly just to give you a view of, this is what your national security leaders are thinking about when they think about what are going to be the important things for warfare in the future. What are the tools we can use? What are the things we need to worry about? And you see some of these I've already talked about: hypersonics, directed energy, lasers. I have a little bit of experience with those. They've always been 5 years from being something real. Hopefully we'll get past those 5 years one of these years. Quantum science and computing. That could completely change cryptology. with quantum computing, because cryptology right now depends on having massive numbers of the time it takes you to actually break some of our cryptology. So now I get to look at my projection of what I think the future might look like as I think about these technology areas and the things that you saw. And you can see there's a pretty good parallel from what I see as the technologies and what the Department of Defense is working on. What's the world going to look like in 20 years? Well, CNBC talks about an interconnected world in which connectivity will drive innovation, economic growth, educational advancement, and social change across the globe. Well, I think in 20 years, we're going to be better connected, but we're not going to quite be interconnected yet. But we are getting really close to being interconnected. As I like to say now, one sneeze in China creates a pandemic, right? This situation is only going to get more so. My opinion is that this can lead to good things, but it also can lead to mischief. The internet and global communication are going to make it impossible for us to hide. It's going to be impossible for us to conduct training and testing and be able to not have people do it. Regional conflicts are going to have global impact, just like a cold in China is having global impact. Regional things, and so global powers, great powers, are not going to be able to remain unengaged. I'm not going to be able to say, I got my big oceans, I'm going to build everything in America, because I'm not going to be able to, because my resources are going to come from elsewhere. Environmental impact conducted one place is going to affect everything else. So we're going to be driven, just as you saw this week, where all of the 8 largest economic countries got together and talked about what they were going to do with respect to the economic market. You're going to see more and more of that. So when it comes to our national security strategy, in 20 years, I think we're going to have 4 elements to it. Homeland defense, but Homeland defense is going to focus on protection of those important systems like our power, and our information in the control of the spectrum or in cyber defense. Social media and internet, I personally believe in 20 years we'll still be struggling with that with respect to individual freedom and what we must do in order to protect ourselves from that. Nuclear deterrence strategy is going to need to include more nation states. We can't keep this genie out in the bottle, I don't think, and so we're going to have to really think about this. Mutual assured destruction is probably not going to be the effective one. So we're going to have to figure out whether there's a nuclear deterrent strategy that has much more of a cooperate and graduate approach, in my opinion, than what we have. And peer competition is going to not only be traditional, but it's going to be spectrum defense. I think spectrum defense is going to be our first priority. We're still going to have wars, little non-terrorism, and that's going to drive resources. But warfare, artificial intelligence, I think, of all the things, is going to have the biggest impact. We will have autonomous systems, but I believe they'll be largely integrated in with the systems we have today. And why I say that is because we're still buying stuff. And for you young midshipmen and cadets, we never throw anything out in the military. We keep everything forever and ever. That's why we will have B-52s that are 4 times as old as you are, that people will be flying. So you will find that man will operate side by side with autonomous weapons. And this is really my comment about there's just going to be not enough of the autonomous systems, but they will be there. And that will change what an operator looks like, because an autonomous system, the actually having pilots and ship drivers and that's not going to be a role that will continue to be dominated by the human. It's going to be done autonomously. In 20 years, ISR and artificial intelligence will mean that data will go directly to the shooter. You won't have that radar sitting out there with a bunch of people like we have for Joint Stars with a bunch of radios telling people where things are. The information will go directly from the source, the satellite, to the shooter. And autonomy will, I believe in 20 years, it'll still be a subject of debate about just when it comes to lethal autonomy. I think we still have to kind of sort that out a little more in our minds. So I don't think in 20 years we will have purely autonomous weapons. I think we will have human involvement to some extent in the use of the weapons. Hypersonics is almost going to eliminate that protection and defense. But we're not going to have a lot of these. The initial ones are going to be expensive, but they're going to be enough to challenge things like the Chinese strategy of continuing to build out on islands in order to deny us access, because hypersonic weapons are going to penetrate. And we will have counter-hypersonics, but that will lag behind the development of hypersonics, just as missile defense has lagged behind the development of missile systems. Directed energy. I believe that lasers, and in particular high-power microwave, will play a key role in defensive systems. It will be high-powered microwave could very well be a game changer, particularly as a counter-hypersonic weapon. As we learn better how to control that and not do harm to human beings and others. So please forget Ocean's 11 with the big thing. I think this can be an effective defensive tool. Lasers will be defense against soft targets. And speaking of somebody who built a megawatt class laser and is a thermodynamicist, until we can figure out how to violate the first and second law, high energy lasers like we used to see when we were watching Star Wars and Star Trek, where I can point at you with my phaser and you disappear, unless there's 3 trucks of power and thermal cooling systems behind you, it's not going to quite be there in 20 years. We're getting some improvements, but we're not going to be there. Command and control is really going to be the one that's going to be the big impact. 5G and the Internet of Things is going to enable us to do essentially across the whole spectrum. Joint domain, we will probably still have an Army and a Navy and an Air Force, but they will work much more closely together because the distinction between the domain is not going to be as significant when it comes to the sensing of that domain as it is today. But we're only going to go so far because this line basically says it takes a little bit for humans to catch up with technology. And, Nimitz did it pretty quickly in World War II, and thank goodness that he did. But my experience is that it takes a while for us, particularly the military, because we're so disciplined, because we know how important it is for everybody to execute and understand the plan. It's difficult for us to completely change the way we think about things. And if we're going to talk about autonomous weapons, if we're going to talk about multi-domain operations, we're going to have to change the way we think about things, and we're going to have to think about things much similar. And right now, I'm sorry, but sailors don't think like airmen, and airmen don't think like soldiers, and Coast Guardsmen don't think like even sailors, and so that's going to take time, and I don't think it'll be there in 20 years. Training is, I think, you talked about my job in revolutionizing training. Well, I want to revolutionize training again, because I'm not going to be able to train the way I used to, because I can't hide. And I can't learn how to operate with autonomous systems. So augmented reality is going to play a significant role in training. We're going to leverage simulation in training because it's going to enable us to be able to train individuals better, and it's going to enable us to be prepared to to train the way we fight without having large areas available and actually using the weapons themselves. So I think particularly the value of augmented reality is going to be very important in military training in the future. And I believe the Air Force is already doing this with pilot training, starting to venture this. So what's the world look like in 50 years? Now, 50 years, I think we have interconnection. So the danger here is if there's a conflict, it could spread quickly and become all-encompassing. So I think that what we will see is we're going to go back to looking at alternatives to violence instead of violence being soft power and military operations will become intertwined. I hope, but I also believe based on history that we will see technology overcome some of the uneven distribution of resources we have in the world that will take away some of the strain that causes warfare. Renewable energy, commercial services from space. We'll be mining in space in 50 years. Write it down. Prove me wrong. We will be bringing back natural resources from asteroids, from space that will help us to deal with it. And there will be advances. So this will contribute to the interconnectivity. But there's still going to be ideological differences that are going to drive conflict. So what would that look like? Well, now the balance between manned and unmanned systems is going to flip. Autonomy is going to reign. The number of manned systems will decline as they are now older. I'm sorry, I don't think we'll be flying B-52s in 50 years. At least I hope not. But if we do, it may not be a human that's piloting it. Humans will play a remote role in remote operations, and they will monitor it. But the timelines are going to be too short for the human to think through. The information is going to be processed. Cyber operations are so fast in the reactions that the human just can't think that fast. So it's going to be done by machine. And by that means kinetic operations will be completely integrated with kinetic operations. Directed energy is going to dominate in the defensive systems. This is my little cartoon picture, you know, the force field. I think that you will see equivalent to that using directed energy. Laser systems on high altitude airships will be used for area defense. And in space, lasers are cool because they don't have to deal with some of the things they do on the ground. So lasers in space are going to provide a very important role for commercial space because space is no longer going to be this place that that there's going to be a lot of things going on in space and it's going to be commercially important because remember, we're mining in space, right? Okay, hypersonics, in addition to having weapons, we're going to have hypersonic flight. That's going to change the way logistics is because we're going to transport things in less than an hour or around the world and get it into place. Command and control, there will be there will not be any humans in the loop in most cases. The separate domains will come together. There will be a combination of biosensors, space platforms that will provide us ubiquitous sensing. And this will contribute to the interconnectivity both from a military perspective as well as the world. All right, logistics, I think I talked about this. We will have essentially the ability for our systems to be able to be maintained and operated from long distances by using artificial intelligence, and software updates will be done. By the way, autonomous systems present a challenge particularly for the Navy. An unmanned ship, who's going to do all that cleanup that's normally done on the ship, right? If there's no humans there to do it, you know, so it's a little challenge. See, logistics, you got to think about it even with unmanned systems. Strategy, with all the different complexities, this is where that augmented reality and artificial intelligence. So you're going to have, I think this is that's a Marine, isn't it? Isn't that a Marine uniform? Look at that. With AR, how cool is that, right? A Marine using the AR? That's cool. I like it. So, I know there's a lot of stars on that collar, aren't there? Yeah, if I count, there's 4 of them. So, I believe that that strategy development and leadership development is going to be all about being able to use augmented reality and AI for campaign planning and for training of leaders now in particular. All right, 100 years. I don't know. But I just thought, for grins, I'd take a look at what the world was like in 1917 versus today. Because 1917 was World War I, right? This was New York today and 100 years ago. This was the state of the art for the military. You notice the gas masks and the machine gun for World War I. Today, we've got this. So it's really hard to predict what it might look like. There's 2 ways it could go if you're a student of science fiction, which I like to read. We could destroy ourselves, which is a possibility, or we could have the Star Trek Federation, right? The Federation, where we all are truly interconnected in military operations. I personally hope and believe in the latter, and in that case, spectrum defense and warfare will dominate. I think wars will be fought in the cyber domain because the cost of physical destruction is just going to be too high in an interconnected world. We will return to the Cold War era of dominance. Autonomous systems are going to perform most functions, and there will be no really large armies. And I'll leave you with just this. Perhaps it's more of a dream than a vision, but this airman technologist who's watched technology evolve for the last 40 years and watched the fact that, yeah, we figured out chemical weapons, but we only used them once. Yeah, we figured out nuclear weapons, but we only used them once. That I think technology will to succeed in fostering peace rather than destruction, and this is what we'll have in 100 years. So I've enjoyed sharing my thoughts with you. I'm always open to a debate about any of this because, like I said, I'm only the one with the microphone, so you get to hear what I thought. But I leave you with, particularly for our students that are here, during the time you're here, really get to understand what this country is all about and just how valuable we have as a nation, our diversity and our creativity and our innovation, because that's what's important in the future. When you join the military, there's structure, but that doesn't mean you have to leave your creativity on the other side. Hey, look at me. I made it all the way to 4-star general. I never did it. I wasn't very good at taking orders, was I, Professor Smith? So, with that, I think we could take some questions, if we have some. All right.
If you have any questions, and if I may, ma'am, you said you're willing to take a challenge on any of your points, and I would say the last ship that I served on, the great USS Rafael Peralta, the operations specialist in Combat Information Center, they actually used a Roomba vacuum to do sweepers every day. So we do have autonomy going for sweepers already.
Okay, so we got to buy some Roomba vacuums for those unmanned ships, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
So any questions, I'll come around and give you the microphone.
You mentioned terrorism, and one of the things that strikes me about some of the new technologies, especially around cyber stuff, is that you don't need to be a big nation anymore to have very powerful weapons, basically. And small groups with ideological thoughts and philosophies that say, I don't care if I wipe out everything on Earth unless everybody does what I want them to do, would have the power to maybe not do quite that, but do an awful lot of destruction. And so it's not big nations who mutually don't want to go away. You have groups that are willing to go away based purely on their philosophical beliefs, and they have some power to create real danger for all big nations, all people on Earth. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I actually have thought about that a lot, particularly, when you look at defense, because, which is why I say the whole concept of mutual assured destruction just isn't going to work with technologies that are easily gained and used. And frankly, this country is no longer so far ahead in technology than the way we used to. The timeline between a new development and having it readily available is so much shorter now that I think we have to change the thought process about what is deterrence mean. The idea that, well, if you do this, I'm going to retaliate in a worse way is probably not, because of the destruction that happens in that. And that's why I think defensive systems that negate the ability. So in cyber, we have to develop cyber defenses. And you can do it. I mean, it isn't an impossibility. We've just never thought about it, because anybody could break into the power grid and shut it down. And we have to be able to defend ourselves, because I believe that is going to be as much a part of a deterrent strategy as having a viable response force, which is what our nuclear strategy has been, at that time, because it's just not going to work anymore. So we have to have a way to provide, if you will, that force field in each of the areas, which is why cyber defense, spectrum control, managing the spectrum, being able to control is going to be critically important.
General, I've asked the same question to the last 3 lecturers. George Friedman, in his book, The Next 100 Years, forecasts that by 50 years out, we will be at war with the Japanese, cyber war fought in space that probably people on the surface won't know. And he says that's because we are a two-ocean nation controlling sea lanes, and that the Japanese can't allow us to do that. Second, solar collectors in space with microwave power down to the surface. What are your thoughts on those 2 questions?
Foreign international studies was not something I spent much time on. But I do know that nations do have a culture and an approach that lasts for centuries. I just point to where we are in Afghanistan today, and I go back to pre-BC and the struggles that anyone has had in Afghanistan, counting the British and the Russians and now us. So I can't discount what he said, but what I can say is that I believe that the issue of control of the ocean is not going to be material because of the ubiquitous availability of information, because of the use of space. And so I think the Japanese are probably going to be more concerned about other things than what the United States is doing. And I think that the relationship between this country and Japan is very different than than it was back in World War II. So I don't believe that's going to happen. Now, as for solar panels and microwave power coming from space, I'd have to look at the power equation because, you know, 1 over r squared is a pretty big number when you start looking at, you know, things are a pretty small number, right? 1 over r squared, but r squared. And so I think that would be my question. I don't have a lot of familiarity with microwaves in space, but I do have a lot of familiarity with communication and radars, because I did work for the National Reconnaissance Office for a while. It's possible, but I don't know that the solar technology we have today would be able to generate sufficient enough power to make that an effective way. But I do believe that solar power from space has a lot of promise in providing the solutions. I think the biggest challenge we are going to have with power is how to manage it, which gets me back to what I postdoced in, batteries. I think the limitation in power in use of renewable energy sources is going to be how you store it. I mean, even look at today. You know, in Texas, in some counties in Texas, electricity is free at night. You know why? Because that's when the windmills generate the power and the grid cannot handle it. So you have people that don't wash their dishes, don't do their laundry until after 10 o'clock at night, and then they turn everything on because the power is, you know. So I believe that the real challenge is going to be in energy storage to be the most effective use of renewable energy sources.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Midshipman Second Class Relag, Stanford University, East Asian Studies. So every time the military tries to buy something, whether it's the LCS or the F-35, we see cost overruns and delays. If you could redo the American procurement system, what would you change?
Okay. You're speaking to somebody that spent 36 years dealing with the latest ACT reform initiative. And so I've seen them all, but I believe that the best way to buy things is you need 3 things. It's really very simple. It's a simple model. We just fail to follow it. You have to give the person that's responsible for buying it what I call near godlike power, which means that they can make decisions without having a council and a committee and 1,500 people say whether that decision can be made or not. So, and by that, I mean, let's take the F-35. I actually was involved in the F-35 several times in my career. The first time was in 1997 when I left your office, and I was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and I was responsible for something called autonomic logistics. Remember, this is 1997. That now is called ALICE, which is a 4-letter word on the F-35 because it's their system for logistics. So at that time, they were doing requirements, and there were so many people involved in defining the requirements for that. Then, so that's the first thing, is the person that's responsible for buying it, you have to trust them, and you have to empower them to be able to make decisions so you can make decisions fast. And then the second thing is you need a small team of really smart people. Now, don't take this wrong, but I don't want a program office that has any second lieutenants in it. I like second lieutenants, and they're really good, and they got a lot of energy, but if I'm going to do something fast, I want a team of experts, people that have been there, done that. So I'll let the second lieutenants work on something that's not an F-35 if that's what's important to me. And the third thing is you can't constrain the resources to the extent that they make foolish decisions because the budget is not enough in a given year. And then the last thing is you have to have direct involvement with the operator, with the person that's actually going to use it. Now, I'll give you a personal example I had. I was responsible for this thing called transformational satellite communications. I had a lot of these big fancy words in my past, right? Transformation, revolutionizing training. And this was a protected communication system, and the Army had a requirement to have what they called comm on the move. Now, this was back, lesson learned from Desert Storm, Marine story. I had a one-star Marine friend that was a comm guy, and they said during the big left hook in Desert Storm, the Marines were way out on the end of the left hook, because that's where we always put the Marines, right? Way out there in front. And they were thrilled because they had a Milstar terminal that they traveled with themselves on a truck, and every night they'd set it up and communicate, then put it back on the truck and travel. And they were called that comm on the move, right? The Army had a requirement for the system that it have comm on the move. So we went through and we did all the math, the power equation, you know, how much power could I put on the satellite to be able to provide, how big did the antenna have to be? And we went back to the Army and we said, you know, you want 40 miles an hour. But, and this was to the generals, right? Not to the staff sergeant that's driving the Humvee. But we can really, if you'll settle for 30 miles an hour, then I can do this for significantly less dollars and a lot less technical risk because I know I can do this. And the answer was, no, we gotta have 40 miles an hour. Now, if we'd asked that Marine, what do you think the Marine would have said? I'll take 10 miles an hour, right? It's better than having to take this thing down and up and down. But so and we've proven that model time and time again. A lot of times you'll hear stories about black programs, you know, special programs that are secret. And they are usually far more successful than big programs like the F-35. You know why? Because nobody knows what they're doing. Because the guy in charge, you know, everybody's got all these super secret clearances. The guy who wants it is heavily involved. So that's my answer. F-35 is a perfect example of a program that tried to do too much. You know, I mean, it has 3 different variants because that was going to make things simpler because we would only, but it really hasn't because there's, you know, the Navy one needs a whole different physical structure in order to be able to land on a ship. The Marines are vertical, so that's a whole different engine. So what did I gain by forcing everybody to put everything on and spending 3 years with working groups to get everybody together to agree on a common set of requirements? And then the budget. Every year, people cut budgets, and that's why I make the point, you know, you gotta fund it sufficiently and don't cut the budget because then somebody tries to cut something in order to fit in the budget. But we never seem to remember those lessons. We just keep repeating it. So I share your frustration, and I share it on the part of the person that was responsible for trying to figure out how to deal with cost overruns and things. But I think those are my 4. If you could do that, give me the money, let me make the decisions, and I'll deliver it for you. Sound good? All right.
So we have time for one more question, and I'd like to invite everyone, if you didn't have a chance to get your question answered, we have some refreshments in the back. If you'd like to stick around and discuss the lecture, General Pawlikowski is going to stick around for a few minutes, and perhaps you get a chance to ask her your question. So one more. One more. I'll get another midshipman here.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Midshipman Second Class Santos, Physics, UC Berkeley. Do you believe that there is a knowledge race, and meaning that all this new technology requires very smart people to do that, and we have lots of brilliant minds in the United States? Do you think we're recruiting them effectively, and are we winning a knowledge race against other countries if there is one?
Well, first of all, I think it's going to be foolish for us to think that we can capture all the technology. It's like what I told Georgiana. By the way, Georgiana and I went to school together here, so the one that asked me the cyber question. We both lived in this house at one time. But I believe that we can't capture it because there's just too much going on all around the world. But I do believe we have a lot of smart people. I do believe that just the fact that I look out here and I see all of you, from my experience in the military, really good people want to serve this country. I have just been overwhelmed when I've looked at some of the bright Americans that want to, like all of you, want to put that, are willing to put that uniform on and be part of something bigger than themselves, greater than themselves. But I really think the thing that is going to be the multiplier for this country, as it always has been, is the fact that we embrace diversity. Because that's the thing that I saw when I was at Berkeley. I'm an engineer, I'm a geek. But the beauty that you take a geek like me who can't draw to save her life and share dinner with an art major at International House from some other country, because we all look at things differently. And sometimes solving a problem is best done by looking at it from many different directions. So I think, I feel very positive about the future of this country when I look at the talent that we have and the willingness of people to be part of something bigger than themselves. So I think we can do it. We have never paid as well as anybody else did. So it's not people do not put this uniform. I did not serve for 36 years because of the money. If I wanted to make money, I would have taken the uniform off after my 4 years of service. And I am not alone. And and plus, we have a lot of great Americans that aren't in uniform that are willing and ready to do great things for this country. So, and I think the value of international relationships is even more important now because of what you talk about. We are not going to be the first at everything as well as we used to be. And that's okay, because it's an interconnected world. And as long as we take advantage of that interconnectivity instead of seeing it as a threat, I think we can use it, as we have always used it, as a multiplier for ourselves. Look at Elon Musk. He was born in South Africa. And look what he's done. He's turned space launch upside down. He's totally changed it. And he never wore a military uniform, but he has changed national security launch. And look what he's done to the car industry. So I believe that this country will has to continue to foster people with innovation and smarts, and then we will succeed. All right. Well, again, thank you very much for listening.
So General, thank you for your informative presentation and for your thoughtful responses to those questions. And I also want to thank you on behalf of the Military Affairs Program and UC Berkeley for taking the time to share your extensive experience and knowledge with us today in this important field. And I'm really happy to have you here.